Tonight on CFTK-TV, a BC First Nation group protests the placement of political signs, what UVic students are contemplating in the upcoming election, and another change in tenant rules in BC.
Northwest BC's only television news team. We are CFTK-TV News.
Hello, I'm Damian Smith. Thank you for joining us here on CFTK-TV. With the federal election campaign well underway, one First Nations band in Northwest BC is calling out the placement of political signs without permission. Here's Jaylene Matthews of CFTK-TV.
The Gitwangak band is calling out the Conservative Party for not asking permission before placing their signage on Gitwangak territory. Elected Chief Sandra Laren says that after the Conservative signs popped up without notice, the band respectfully asked the Conservatives to remove the signs.
And we said it was fine if there was any individual who wanted them on their property, or if he had sought approval from our rights and title holders, who are our hereditary chiefs, and he could convey that, then we would also be fine with it.
Ellis Ross did respond to CFTK-TV about the signs. He said it was his team's understanding that the signs were placed on the provincial right-of-way.
He actually, well, it wasn't him, it was the campaign team, simply came back and said, can you take pictures of where they are because they're on a right-of-way? Which is a very colonial way of thinking, and it just reinforces our point that he's not respecting how to have respectful dialogue with Indigenous peoples in this area especially. And so we wrote that back saying, like, we don't think that way. We'd still appreciate you removing them, and still no acknowledgement of how we were feeling or the reason, and came back and said, are you asking everybody to take them off? And, you know, quite frankly, Taylor Backrack, the NDP candidate in the area, always asks for permission ahead of time, and has relationships with our hereditary chiefs, so it's not even a question. Because he does engage respectfully, he won't ever do anything like that, whereas Ellis Ross won't even have, you know, a respectful dialogue back and forth.
Laren says that currently the band does not have plans to remove the signs themselves.
That remains to be seen. Other areas have taken it upon themselves to just physically remove them themselves. I don't think I want to be feeding into that kind of behavior and model that for our children. I think, you know, we don't want there to be hate and anger and resentment and retaliation.
CFTK-TV did reach out to the BC government on the legalities of highway shoulders on Indigenous land, but did not receive clarification before deadline. For CFTK-TV News, I'm Jaylene Matthews.
Moving down to south of the province at the University of Victoria, where many of the students on campus may be voting for the first time in their life. Despite a quick election, turnouts at the polls are still expected to be quite high in the younger demographic. Anna McMillan has the story from CTV.
As federal candidates and their campaigners take questions from UVic students, they're hearing some common themes.
Costs of living and affordability of housing.
More affordable housing across the country would be massive.
Housing, like access as well as affordability.
There is, however, plenty of variety when it comes to the ballot box issues on young voters' minds.
For me personally, it's also like the youth education.
Economic stability is a real big one. We're seeing the Dow Jones fluctuate like crazy right now.
Income inequality is a big thing, especially here and in Vancouver as well.
Some voters are decided.
That's really important to me, is that the Green Party still has some impact federally on the politics.
Others aren't so sure.
I'm undecided.
I'm currently going to be reviewing the candidates in my ridings while I decide on who to vote for.
In the last federal election, roughly 47% of eligible voters aged 18 to 24 cast a ballot. Elections Canada says that's compared to 75% for people aged 65 to 74.
This is an historic election, so I suspect and I expect the voter turnout to go up, because the stakes seem so obviously higher, and impacting people of all ages and all generations.
That political science professor says Trump, tariffs, and trade are top of mind for voters of all ages.
I am a political science student, so a lot of those things I really understand the intricacies of and the importance of kind of protecting our democracy here in Canada as we see some democratic backsliding happening in the United States.
There are millions of voters aged 18 to 35, giving them some serious sway.
We're voting for our futures.
We have a lot of stake in the future of this country, given that we have our entire lives ahead of us.
Anna McMillan, CTV News, UVic.
Well, you have to be pretty engaged in the political cycle to attend a rally on the campaign trail, and that is what thousands of people are doing right now across the country. Unmistakably, thousands showed for Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre, but thousands were also lining up to see what Mark Carney is all about as well. CTV's Abigail Beeman is traveling with the Liberal campaign.
Who's ready to axe some taxes?
Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre draws thousands almost everywhere he goes. They're engaged and excited.
He's a hero for Canada, I can tell.
I think there's going to be a lot of momentum.
And Poilievre likes to talk about it.
When was the last time we had a rally that big in Canada?
How did you like our rally yesterday?
It was nice. Big crowd.
Very big.
Liberals quick to make a Donald Trump comparison.
You missed a beauty.
When was the last time you had that in Kingston?
This is a record crowd. They've never had a crowd like that in the history of this place.
Mark Carney's rallies are much smaller in comparison, but 2,000 people in Conservative stronghold Alberta Tuesday night surprised even the leader.
I thought I was in Calgary.
The New Democrats, meanwhile, aren't holding rallies.
The claimed crowd size is a show business indicator. I'm looking at the hard numbers of the polls.
While rallies can show an engaged electorate, Nelson Wiseman says attendees represent a tiny fraction of who votes on Election Day.
What counted? Crowd size, number of members, number of people contributing to you? Or what happened on Election Day, which the polls often are a much better indicator of.
CTV News asked Mark Carney for his thoughts on Poilievre's rallies, but he avoided the question. Tonight's event here in Saskatoon is called a meet and greet instead. The Liberals currently hold no seats in Saskatchewan, but campaign sources tell CTV they're encouraged and they're here because they're looking to pick some up. Abigail Beeman, CTV News, Saskatoon.
Coming up next, changes have been made to rental vacancies for the second time in 9 months. Welcome back to CFTK-TV. Well, changes have been in the province for how long landlords will have to let their tenants know in terms of when they will need to move out of their unit. Here's Isabella Zavarisi of CTV News down in Vancouver.
Signs like this could be few and far between as BC starts to see higher rental vacancy rates. Those vacancy rates are one of the reasons the province is changing its policy on no-fault evictions. But some are wary.
It's just unnecessary and it's not fair.
Last July, the province increased the amount of notice a landlord could give from 2 months to 4. Now, only a 3-month notice will be required.
It cuts into the amount of time a tenant would have to find alternative housing, and at the end of the day, these are tenants who, if they're going to have to move, it's for no fault of their own.
Moving it back to 3 months still makes it longer than it's ever been, still leads the country as far as the length of time, but allows a little bit more balance and flexibility to ensure that we're benefiting everyone. Landlords can see that and tenants can see it.
A group that represents landlords says they welcome the change.
We heard from many people that was making it difficult to want to rent out their unit, making it something where they considered, well, if it's going to take me 4 months to possibly get my property back, if I need to move into it, do I rent it out in the first place?
The Tenant Resource and Advisory Center says clawing back these no-fault eviction timeframes weaken tenant protections.
They're getting less heads up, less time to find a new home in an already very crippling sort of rental housing landscape.
The measures that are there to ensure that landlords don't abuse the system are still there. Nothing changes.
The province says the new policy will come into effect in the next few weeks. Isabella Zavarisi, CTV News, Vancouver.
And now we take a look at the local weather forecast for tonight and for the week ahead. Tonight on the north coast, it should have some rain ending before morning time. Winds should be coming from the west at 30 kilometers per hour, increasing to 70 over the coastal sections, and the low should be +3. For the next 5 days, we should see steady temperatures with some showers tomorrow, some sun heading into the weekend, and then back to rainy conditions on Sunday heading into the next week. The high will be 8 degrees 3 times this week, with the low being 2 degrees on Monday evening. Tonight in Terrace and Kitimat, it should rain with winds up to 30 kilometers per hour, increasing to 50 at times, and the low should be at +3. This week should see a similar pattern to the coast with a cooler couple of days heading into the weekend. There's still a slight chance of sun on Saturday, but that should be the only day of sunny conditions. The high will be 9 degrees on Tuesday, where that could change, and the low will be 2 degrees on Friday and Monday evening. Tonight should see showers wrapping up in the Bulkley Valley near midnight, then cloudy conditions following. Winds should be coming from the southeast at 20 kilometers per hour, changing to 30 overnight with gusts of 70 as well. The low should be -3 with a wind chill of -10. And for this upcoming forecast, the next few days should see sunny conditions overall, but then back to cloudier days on Sunday as we see an increase in temperature throughout the week. And there are also some chances for flurries for the next 2 of the next 3 days. The high will be 11 degrees starting next week, with the low being -3 tomorrow night. And now we take a look at the roadside report from around the Northwest. For additional updates, check out drybc.ca. Highway 16 has bridge maintenance on Haida Gwaii, utility work near Rainbow Lake, ditching east of Port Edward, utility work west of Terrace, and road sweeping east of Burns Lake. Highway 37 has frost heaves, Highway 37A has falling rocks, and Telegraph Creek Road has muddy sections. And these are what the cameras are looking like from around the Northwest. Still to come, how the different parties will deal with pharmacare for this upcoming election. Hello again. Well, of course, tariff threats and the impacts to Canada's economy have dominated the campaign trail in the past few months, but some voters are concerned that healthcare could be left behind. CTV's Alison Bamford takes a look at the issue of pharmacare and why Canadians do not want it to be an empty promise.
Jeremy Storing is packing the essentials. He doesn't travel anywhere without his insulin and backup supplies.
The technology has been the best help that I could have got for managing diabetes.
Technology like his continuous glucose monitor that connects to an app. It works directly with his insulin pump to administer the drug when he needs it. Equipment and medication that aren't cheap.
Throughout a year, I'm getting close to $10,000 of what would be out-of-pocket cost if I didn't have private insurance.
Ottawa passed its Pharmacare Act last October that could make things more affordable. The program covers birth control and diabetes medication with additional funds for supplies, although coverage varies by jurisdiction. Only Manitoba, BC, PEI, and the Yukon signed agreements before the election was called.
So it's an unfair patchwork right now. The program needs to be finished.
The federal health minister has said the Liberals would try to strike deals with the remaining provinces and territories if re-elected. The Conservatives say they won't cut the existing program, and the NDP promised to push for an expansion. At the Saskatoon Sexual Health Clinic, they hope other provinces get the chance to sign an agreement. Right now, the clinic relies on donations to sponsor 10 patients each year to cover the $500 cost of an IUD.
Obviously, we have hundreds coming through, so it's not enough to cover that. And I know that there are many people who would want an IUD but couldn't necessarily afford that.
Advocates are already calling for the pharmacare program to include more drugs now that tariff-related job cuts could leave even more Canadians without workplace benefits. Allison Bamford, CTV News, Saskatoon.
And yesterday, President Trump put a pause on tariffs in most sectors on all the countries he is currently dealing with, except for China, who has become the #1 enemy in this trade war for the United States. Joy Malvin has more down in Washington.
The U.S. president congratulating racing champions at the White House before putting the brakes on most of his worldwide tariffs.
I did a 90-day pause for the people that didn't retaliate, because I told them if you retaliate, we're going to double it.
In fact, he jacked up the tariffs on China yet again when Beijing retaliated, up from 104% to a stunning 125% duty, pitting the world's two largest economies against one another. All Chinese imports coming into the U.S. will face duties, hiking up prices on just about everything: clothes, shoes, toys, and electronics. Still, Trump believes China's president will reach out.
China wants to make a deal. They just don't know how quite to go about it. You know, it's one of those things they don't know how quite. They're proud people. And President Xi's a proud man. I know him very well.
Stocks soared at the news of Trump's temporary ceasefire in his trade war, one of the biggest days since the Second World War.
We saw the successful negotiating strategy that President Trump implemented a week ago today.
The White House insists the pullback was the president's plan all along, the so-called art of the deal. Trump telling Republican donors last night,
I'm telling you, these countries are calling us up, kissing my ass. They are.
Trump says his reversal in part the result of those 75 nations asking to negotiate new trade deals. But the president said he was watching the market meltdown, getting blowback from business leaders and Republicans, and fears of a recession.
I think probably that's a likely outcome.
Some economists believe Trump may have blinked.
I was watching the bond market. People were jumping a little bit out of line. They were getting yippy, you know? They were getting a little bit yippy, a little bit afraid.
After insisting for days he'd hold tough on his tariffs, it's a stunning reversal for this president, determined to upend decades of global trade.
And now we take a look at the stock market, where we have a big increase in the Canadian dollar. The Canadian dollar is up almost 0.7 of a cent. The price of gold is up at $98.10. Oil is down at $2.28. Natural gas is down 26 cents, and aluminum is down $82. In Toronto, the TSX is down 712 points. The Venture Index is down 6.28. In New York, the Dow Jones is down 1,014 points, and NASDAQ is down 737. And it seems as though we are seeing the final touches on the provincial side when looking at Canada and U.S. relations. Today, Premier David Eby directed the government to cancel whatever American contracts that were still viable. The BC government will be reviewing all contracts with U.S. companies to increase the province's dependence of their own goods and services. And other areas that they will limit is the cancellation to U.S. publications and softwares, and non-essential travel as well. Premier Eby will look to be one of the many to prioritize relationships with other countries. Still ahead, the Vancouver Canucks are eliminated from playing in the 2025 NHL playoffs. Welcome back. Well, researchers have found a trend under the last decade or so in the younger generations when it comes to cannabis use, with an increase in a certain diagnosis being linked from a cannabis change. Here's Pauline Chan of CTV News.
We have seen significant changes in the last 6 years. What we are seeing and what the research is showing is that there's a really big increase in the number of young people that are experiencing episodes of psychosis after cannabis use.
Psychiatrist Dr. Julie Richard says the marijuana that many adults grew up with are a pale version of the edibles and vapes that are currently available.
Marijuana products of the 80s and 90s were typically joints that were on average around the potency of anywhere from 12 to 18% THC. What we're seeing now is that young people are accessing a variety of products that are made legally and sold in stores. Of course, these young people aren't supposed to get it by virtue of age, but we all know that young people can easily get alcohol or other products.
London Health Sciences researcher Dr. Lena Palaniappan has been studying the effects of frequent cannabis use on dopamine levels in people with and without experiences of psychosis or schizophrenia. And he explains that dopamine is a chemical that helps the brain assign value to things in an individual's life.
And if you have excess dopamine in some areas in the brain, you will start attaching meaning and value to things that you shouldn't be attaching. And this is what happens in psychosis.
Things like hearing imaginary voices or hallucinations.
When we scan their brain, especially the back of the brain where the dopamine signals start and connect with the rest of the brain, that area showed a higher signal for turnover of dopamine when people have been using cannabis for a long period of time.
And this link between cannabis use and increased risk of psychosis is especially high in young people whose brains are still developing.
Younger people should be a little bit more careful because you're in that age where psychosis develops. So typically late teens, early 20s is when schizophrenia onset occurs.
Dr. Palaniappan says people with cannabis dependency should try to minimize their use, but Dr. Richard goes further.
We know that THC is a very toxic stimulant to the brain, and that is causing lasting brain changes, and that there's no evidence that it supports adolescent mental health, quite the opposite.
Pauline Chan, CTV News.
And after a great season last year, the Vancouver Canucks were eliminated from playoff contention for the 8th time in the last 10 seasons. Ben Nesbitt has our final story of the day.
The puck back as Marcus Pettersson feeds the side, they score! Garland doesn't shoot it, puts it in front, they score! McQueen Hughes, 10 seconds left, his shot, oh, Hronik dismissed at the side, out center, they score! Dumba check behind the net, Garland centers, they score! Kiefer Sherwood with 1:16 to go in overtime. The Canucks complete the comeback.
A flurry for the ages. The Canucks make history with the latest 3-goal comeback win in NHL history.
It says a lot about the group and the quality of players. When adversity hits, we just dig in and guys are able to execute and make stuff happen.
The historic comeback comes just days after the Canucks set a franchise record, scoring 5 goals in a 4.5-minute span against the Anaheim Ducks.
A fun story of how that completely sets aside everything else. Is it, like, how did this comeback happen? What was that about?
The explosive offensive outbursts are too little, too late, begging the question, where was this the rest of the season?
The simple truth was that they didn't get enough from Elias Pettersson and JT Miller, and that's it. Those two were meant to drive the bus, and they did not play well enough.
With Miller gone and Pettersson having arguably his worst NHL season, firepower up the middle, a clear off-season need.
You look at the center ice position, that's a depth chart of horrors. All due respect to those guys who are trying hard, but they're simply not the players this team needs.
Next up for the Canucks, their final road game of the season, a matchup with the Avalanche in Colorado Thursday night. Ben Nesbitt, CTV News, Vancouver.
That'll be all for the cast tonight. Thank you very much for watching and have a great evening.